Every day we see more tents under bridges, more families living out of cars. And while the problems seem insurmountable, the solutions are simpler than you think. We share the real stories and the real solutions of homelessness, what works, what doesn't, and how communities like ours can do better. I'm Baron King, and this is Give Me Shelter. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Give Me Shelter. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to be covering a variety of topics today, some things I've touched on in previous episodes, but we're going to dive a little deeper. And we've entitled this episode Myth Busting. And what do I mean by that? As you know, if you've seen the first couple episodes, my goal in this podcast is that we could get everybody on the same page with informed discussions about what aspects of homelessness are really drivers of homelessness and what are just some concerns, right? Because if we're going to solve a problem, it's really important that we understand the problem. And if we come to a problem with some mythology in our head or some bias or some knowledge gaps, it's going to limit our ability to come up with effective solutions. And so we're going to be covering topics such as laziness and unemployment and how that fuels homelessness. We're going to be talking about substance use and mental illness, and we're even going to talk about a topic that I hear every once in a while, and it relates to how dangerous are homeless individuals. And so let's start off. When I get a chance to speak in front of audiences and I talk to people afterwards, one of the things that I hear is how much of our homeless crisis is related to laziness, right? And the phrase that I hear so often, it often makes my blood boil, but I'm really cool and calm this morning, is why don't people just get a job, right? And where does this come from? This comes from this idea that people are homeless because they don't want to work, and if they just got a job, they would be able to be housed and we wouldn't have this crisis. And so we're going to dive into some realities around workforce and homelessness. So we have a workforce development department within our facility. We work really hard at getting people employed, also getting people employed at a higher level. And what we've found over the last year and a half is that 50% of the people that are experiencing homelessness, at least in Chattanooga, and I would say that probably extrapolates to the rest of the nation as well, 50% are actually employed. That probably shocks a lot of people. The problem is they're not employed at a level that allows for them to maintain stable housing. Here in Chattanooga, we have very low unemployment. It's about 3.4% currently. That's beats the national average by a little bit. There are some employers that offer high-wage jobs for medium or non-skilled entry-level positions, so that really helps our cause. The problem is we have a significant shortage of affordable housing. And so it's an equation, right? The money I bring in on a regular basis goes to expenses, and those expenses probably start with most people with housing. And so let me give you a statistic. Housing is not cheap in Chattanooga, and it's very difficult to find one-bedroom or efficiency apartments. And so that raises the rate, right? Supply and demand. If there's low supply of one-bedroom housing, the cost is going to be higher. So I'm going to ask you a question. If you're making minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, how many hours a week would you have to work to afford a one-bedroom apartment? The answer is going to shock you. It's 139 hours per week. So what does that mean? If somebody has limited professional experience, limited education, and is forced to work below $10 an hour, they are simply not going to find a rental that they can afford. And that's what we're seeing on a daily basis. People that are working and they just can't make the threshold. I know that, when I was a lot younger and I went to get an apartment, no one asked me to have 3 times the monthly rent in income. I didn't have to prove a certain income threshold. Nowadays, a landlord won't even speak to you if you can't demonstrate that you bring in at least 3 times what the monthly rent will be. And quite honestly, I think that's a responsible situation, because if you're paying more than 1/3 of your income in rent, you're going to be rent burdened, which means you're not going to have money for medical bills, for car repair, for reasonable food costs, and pretty soon you're going to be back on your rent and potentially evicted. There's also another factor related to earnings is that there's been a disparity between property growth values over the last 20 years and income. And so what I mean by that is from 2005 to 2025, property values have increased 115%. Okay? We know property values go up. Real estate's always usually a pretty good investment. But the problem here is that wages over that same period have increased only 78%. And year over year, you create a bigger gap between the property value and the income value, right? And so starting 25 years ago, 20 years ago, um, we've seen this gap can increase on a regular basis. Now, 78% wage growth. When you add in the cost of living and inflation into that, real wage growth equates to only 12%. So you're comparing a 115% increase in income growth versus a 12% growth in real wages over a 20-year period. You can start to understand why it is more and more difficult for the average person to afford buying a home or even finding rentals. Now, one more thing that I think is worth mentioning here is there's a concept that plays into this argument of why don't you just get a job? And it's called the tyranny of achievement. It's this idea that if I work hard and do all the right things, I will be successful. And for a certain percentage of our American population, that's probably what they've experienced, right? They did the right thing in school, they stayed out of trouble, they got a good job after they got a good education, and things have gone well. And so they take their own experience and apply it to everybody in the United States. But what if that wasn't my background? What if I grew up in foster care and at 18 I found myself on the street? What if I didn't have the opportunity to go to college? What if I have a learning disability and I live in a state that doesn't provide benefits for that? Not everybody has a level playing field. And so, what I would just simply ask the listener to understand is when we buy into the idea of the tyranny of achievement, that the only thing we have to do is apply ourselves and everybody's starting point, it's a level playing field, then we start to miss the point. We have tens, maybe 100 million people that are living below the poverty line in the United States, the most affluent country in the whole world. And yet we have a significant number of our friends and neighbors that simply can't afford enough, that don't have enough income to afford a single bedroom apartment. Next topic we're going to tackle is addiction. And there's this idea that I hear all the time is that people's substance use behavior is the reason they're homeless. What I would say is, the bottom line is we always look at systemic problems versus individual problems to try and create solutions to homelessness. And what I mean is, if the systemic problem relates to the amount of affordable housing, that's where we really need to invest dollars to make that happen. But there are individual factors that exacerbate homelessness. And I would say exacerbate rather than cause, because one of the things I would say is in my time working in this industry, I don't think I've ever met somebody that was homeless simply because there wasn't enough affordable housing. There's usually always one other or two other or three other mitigating circumstances that you could point to say, okay, it's the combination of affordable housing gaps and also this other issue. And so let's talk about substance use. We do see it on the street, but I've been a therapist for nearly 20 years, and I saw it a lot in private practice from people that were housed and that looked successful, yet they had substance abuse issues. So I wouldn't say necessarily that substance abuse is always the reason that people are homeless. It makes it harder for other people. If you have a serious substance use problem and it keeps you from going to work and you lose that income stream and then you're evicted, well, yeah, it was the combination of those two things. But a couple things to think about when we're talking about substance use. In 2018, a study found that individuals experiencing homelessness had a higher rate of past year unhealthy alcohol use, 44%. and drug use compared to non-homeless individuals. So it is at a higher rate, right? And what we see is the biggest difference is when we divide the homeless population into two subcategories, sheltered and unsheltered. And what I mean is somebody who's unsheltered is living in a tarp tent, something like that, living outside 24/7, where somebody that is sheltered homelessness is probably living in maybe an abandoned domicile that's not really fit for habitation. Maybe they're couch surfing, maybe they're staying with friends. Big difference between substance use. We're looking at 29% substance use issues with unsheltered homelessness versus 4% below the national average, 4% of sheltered homelessness. And so when we're looking at where do we see the prevalence of substance use disorders, it's almost always with our chronically unsheltered population. In the United States, we have 134 million people that abuse alcohol on a regular basis. And so nearly 1/3 of our nation's population abuses alcohol. But the amount of unsheltered people or the amount of homeless people in our nation is at 771,000. So that's 1/2 of 1% of our national population. So what I'm saying is we can't simply look at alcohol abuse as the main driver of homelessness because the majority of people that abuse alcohol are sheltered. Does that make sense? Okay. The other thing I would say is let's talk about the context of substance use. It doesn't look like substance use I see with college students. It doesn't look like substance use I see with middle class or upper class that have parties on the weekend. Substance use in our homeless community is really a form of medicating depression, anxiety, and the realities of homelessness. And why is that? Well, most of the folks that we see experiencing homelessness do not have the ability to get psychiatric or even primary care treatment. If they're struggling with depression and anxiety, they seek to self-medicate it. And they seek to self-medicate it with whatever substance are available, whether it's alcohol, illicit drugs, or whatever. Why is this important? Because I think there's this idea that if you just stop partying, you wouldn't be homelessness. Folks, the substance use I see on the street is not partying. It's trying to, take something that won't let me fall asleep, trying to stay awake overnight so I don't get assaulted or raped. It's something that helps me get past the shame and the realities of the fact that I can't live in a domicile. And I just think a little bit of empathy would be appropriate here. Now, I want to throw out one more concept, and I've used this on a couple other podcasts, but I think it's important. And what I would say is substance use, and to some degree, the mental health crisis that we see in our homeless population is very much a chicken and the egg situation. What I mean is what came first. Are people homeless because of pre-existing substance use? Some are. But are some people using drugs and alcohol inappropriately because of the reality of their unsheltered situation? Yes, that is also true. Two things can be true here. And so when we look back at that statistic that I talked about, that 29% of the people that are unsheltered are using drugs and alcohol, while only 4% of people that are sheltered, way below the national average, are abusing drugs and alcohol. What that tells me is we have a lot of people that fell into homelessness and now are just simply finding a way to cope. And because they don't have access to mental health care, well, they don't have access to psychotropic medication, they're using whatever they can. I saw this doing reentry work in my last nonprofit where we served a population of chronic recidivists coming out of prison in residential treatment facilities. And nearly 90% of those folks that came into our facility from prison had a diagnosis of depression, anxiety, and substance use. It was pretty consistent. And yet, once they got into our facilities and stabilized, we did not see those behaviors. We did not see those actions. We did not see those signs or symptoms. And so I would argue that when we're looking at mental health and substance use together, that the mental health issues experienced by being unsheltered, my depression, my anxiety, my trauma, all of that is most likely a reasonable a reasonable expected response to the reality of living homeless. And if we could get people sheltered, what I believe we would see is a significant reduction in the signs and symptoms of those mental health issues. When that happens, we eliminate a lot of the need for self-medication. And so what we're saying is we spend a lot of time arguing about how mental illness and substance use drives homelessness, when we really ought to be arguing about what are the systemic factors, such as inappropriate wages or wages that are just insufficient for our housing stock. HUD estimates that we're 10 million units below what we need to stabilize the housing market, and most of the locations that are represented in that shortfall are the West Coast, the southern states, and the East Coast. It's like a horseshoe. And where is there affordable housing? Where is there housing? Mostly in the Rust Belt. But what we lack there is jobs. And so what we really need to do is focus most of our attention on building affordable housing, getting people into housing. And then what I think you're going to see is a lot of these other issues, these factors that are not drivers of homelessness, but are factors in homelessness, will evaporate. Okay, this one resonates with me because I hear it a lot in Chattanooga. I hear it a lot because our organization provides over 30 different services to men and women and families experiencing homelessness. And we provide meals 365. We get people housed. We have workforce development. We provide showers in our facility, foot care, you name it. If it's a need, we provide it. And I've had people tell me that our organization is part of the problem because we make things too comfortable for people in Chattanooga to be homeless. And people are coming here from out of state, out of county, to take advantage on how nice we treat homeless individuals. And let me tell you, I don't know where this argument comes from. I'm guessing that if you live in a different city in the United States, you've heard that same argument. Fortunately, we have some data. People receiving services for homelessness, their information is entered into a computer program that is shared by all service providers in the region, and it's called the HMIS system, the Homeless Management Information System. And so if somebody pops up into our facility and they need services, we can pull up their name and their information. We can see where they got services. We can see how long they've been homeless. We can see who's serving them, how, and we can provide services that might not all already have been provided. It's a wonderful tool. And here's what we found. 86% of the people that are receiving services in Hamilton County are from Hamilton County. All right. We have data that shows that only a small percentage of people, and we live right on the Georgia border, only a small number of people, less than 14% of people receiving services are actually from an area outside of our county. And so people are not driving here in droves. They're not coming here on trains and buses and airplanes to eat our turkey dinners in our dining hall. It's just not happening. And I'll give you some reasons for that. Number one, most people experiencing homelessness have no money. They have no resources. They can't buy a bus ticket. Maybe somebody else will put them on a bus, and maybe they'll come to Chattanooga because occasionally that does happen. But what really causes people to drive to a new location if they're experiencing homelessness is two things: job opportunities and affordable housing. Chattanooga has one of those, which is job opportunities. We do not have affordable housing. And most of the people that are experiencing homelessness grew up here. They grew up here as kids. They had jobs. Something happened. They fell out of housing, and now they're really struggling. There's also another thing, that some tools we use for people that are experiencing homelessness. When they come to our case managers, one of the first things we ask them is, are you from out of town? Where does your family live? And the reason we ask that is the cheapest, quickest, and most effective way to address somebody's current homeless experience is called redirection. We try and put them back in touch with people that are connected to them from earlier in their life, and maybe they can give them a room. Maybe they can give them a place to stay. Maybe they can send them some money and help them get back on their feet. But that is one of the best tools we have. And what we find is when we ask that question, the people that we're working with are from right here. And so redirection here doesn't usually mean helping them get back home. We're not sending them back to Illinois or Pennsylvania. It is trying to see what kind of resources we have right here in Tennessee. The other argument or the other thing that I hear from time to time is that, well, people are homeless because they choose to be. When an article comes out in the Times Free Press or when it's posted online, one of my favorite things to do is read the comments that the readers write, because oftentimes it's overwhelmingly in support of the plight of people experiencing homelessness. But I do hear the comment a lot that I can tell you, and this is what I've read, that people are homeless because they choose to be. I've been in this industry for over 4 years. I've worked closely with thousands of people. And what I will tell you is I've yet to meet somebody that chose to be homeless. What I have heard is that I've heard people give up. There's a word that I believe exists in our fight against homelessness that is an absolute killer, and that word is no. N-O. No, you can't have this job. No, you can't have this apartment. No, you can't have this voucher. No, you can't have this benefit. No, you can't keep your food stamps. No, you're no longer eligible for Medicare. Now, I would ask the listener here, if you were experiencing homeless for 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, and every time you tried to get back on your feet, you heard the word no, would you keep trying? My guess is at some point you would give up, because we are wired to desire things that are better than what we have. We're wired that way. We long for things, and that's a good thing. It's our internal drive that we keep working hard to acquire things or achieve things. But there's a limit to that drive, and it causes psychic pain when we hear no over and over and over again. It's almost as if people experiencing homelessness, once they've heard no for the 100th time, they say, you know what, it hurts too much to want something better for myself, so I'm just going to change all my focus to survival. And so if you want to get involved, one of the best things you could do, if you know somebody that's struggling with homelessness, instill hope. Keep that candle burning, because once that flame goes out on that candle, there's not much we can do. All right, real quickly, we're going to hit with one last thing, and this is something I haven't talked about, but I think it deserves some recognition. Did you know that 60% of Americans are fearful of homeless individuals? 60% of Americans fear those that are homeless. And so why is that? Are they murderers? Are they rapists? Are they bombers? The fact of the matter is that men and women experiencing homelessness have a very low chance of hurting you. In fact, homeless individuals are 17% more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators of crime. And so here's what I would say. We have a facility where homeless individuals come in and out of it, 300 or 400 a day. Almost all of them have a weapon on themselves, a knife, a hammer, something like that. And the reason is they've experienced trauma. They've experienced violence. These are defensive postures. These are defensive mechanisms to try and keep themselves safe. But when you look at the local crime statistics, whether it's here in Chattanooga or throughout the United States, it is highly unlikely that anybody listening is ever going to be harmed by somebody that's homeless. What I would say is they're in more need of your help. They're more likely to be a victim of violent crime because they have no defenses. When they go to bed, it's closing a tent fly. And if they have something that somebody wants, or maybe somebody just has a violent streak and is roaming the streets at night, it's a really dangerous place to be. When I go to bed at night, I lock my house and I don't think a second thought about it. But this idea that we're going to be harmed by other people is just not the case. We occasionally see homeless on homeless violence, and oftentimes it revolves around somebody wanting or needing something that somebody else has. But most of these individuals, they're just trying to survive. All right, so what do all these things have in common? We can't let ourselves get tripped up by individual factors that can exacerbate homelessness. We have to look at the structural things. Are we doing enough to educate our people? Are we doing enough to create wages that are sufficient to keep people housed? Are we doing enough to build housing? Are we doing enough to create programs at the federal level that would give people a temporary housing benefit, just enough time to get on their feet? Something other than the one-size-doesn't-fit-all tool of permanent supportive housing. No, the answer is no. And I think we need to do better. We rank so high worldwide in homelessness, and yet we're the most wealthiest nation on the planet. We have to do better. If you have any ideas, if you have some thoughts on topics, if you want to respond to me, if you want to read me the Riot Act, I'm fine with it. You can do that at info@chatfoundation.org. I'd encourage you to go to our website, chatfoundation.org, to learn more about our crisis and what we're doing to solve it at the local level and how we're trying to influence behaviors at the national level. I appreciate you tuning in, and have a good day. Thanks for listening to Give Me Shelter. If you made it this far in the episode, I invite you to share it with at least one person today, because change happens one conversation at a time. I'm Baron King. We'll see you next time.